So John Pierfelice, did I get that right?
That's correct.
Pierfelice? All right, John. Uh, so you work with the Sophos MDR team, specifically within the rapid response unit. And your job is to support customers that are encountering active real-time cyber attacks. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so feet in quite a few different pools. I would say obviously rapid response is a big one. So Sophos and non-Sophos customers, we help anybody. Doesn't matter if you own our tool sets or not. Our objective and our primary goal is disaster recovery and digital forensics. So core mission is you're under attack or you've been attacked. You need help recovering from the incident. We want to get in and obviously help repair as fast as possible, get you back in functional and operational status, so that way you can get your business, up and running again. That's the goal.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you guys have a lot of those? Is that like a are you pumping those out daily or weekly, or like what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, we obviously have what I would classify as busy and slow times of the season. I think that's all dictated by obviously the threat actors and when they like to target. We typically see a
Mm-hmm.
very large influx towards the end of the year, part and parcel because a lot of, unfortunately, IT teams take time off because they
Mm,
stack it so much throughout the year. So when they're forced to use their
right.
time off, it's normally obviously October, November, and December, which is where we see the increase. But traditionally speaking, this is a year-round, 0-day year-round adventure for us. So anybody can get hit anytime. So we want to be there to support no matter what, 24/7.
I got you. That's interesting. So there's such a deep human element here because for the hackers to say, "Hey, I'm going to wait until the holiday times," they're just thinking there's less eyeballs on the systems at those times, which is why they can get in. Is that kind of the plan?
Yeah, that's the goal for them. Is we've seen a lot of shifts in the attack methodology that these threat actors are using. So back in the day, a lot of the focus was really, I want to get in and steal your data and hold you hostage. So it was very targeted attacks. But with the supply chain attacks that we're seeing, think Kaseya and Microsoft with like Hafnium and Proxy Shell and Proxy Logon. These supply chain attacks are becoming so much more prominent now because they can easily hit anybody just by
Mm-hmm.
hitting the top dog and working their way down just by
Right.
osmosis.
Right.
Um, but the biggest challenge that we really see, going back to what you asked, is really these threat actors. It's a human job for them, so to speak. We actually had one of our incident response leads call the number to ask for the decryption keys, and they literally, it's like, hey, thank you for calling. What can we help you with? Yeah, we want to get the data back. We need the keys. Okay, let me route you to our payment processing team. Like it's basically like calling a help center at this point, and it's
Wow.
very odd, but this is a human element, and especially when you're dealing with people out of the country, they don't face the legal, I would say, uh, kind of detriments that you would get in the United States if this occurs. It's all just, they do whatever they want to do to make their money. So it's a very, very humanized relationship, but it's
Right.
very dehumanized when you see what they're actually doing. But then, funnily enough, you get threat actors who accidentally, hold a hospital ransom, and they'll actually give the decryption keys back for free and go, "Hey, we didn't mean to do this to you guys." So it's an odd
Interesting.
world that we live in on that
Interesting.
aspect.
It's like everyone has their own moral compass per se of how these should be handled, and huh. Yeah, I had just read something. The FBI had brought down some sort of ransomware gang, and at first it looked like the page said that they were owned, but then there was another page that came back and said they were restored. And it was almost like they were saying, "Hey, now that this happened, we're dropping our moral compass. We don't care if we target critical infrastructure at this point."
Yeah, think of the recent casino MGM that got hit. They actually published, the threat actor published an article with documentation stating that they actually reached out to MGM and told them, we will attack you. We don't want to do this. Let's do some pre-negotiations and make life easy. They
Interesting.
ignored it entirely. And then they said, you know what? It's full on attack now, because they actually blasted the threat actor online and said like, yeah, they never had access, they couldn't do this. And the threat actor just went, full scorched earth, because they were like, hey, we're here, we can do this. We tried to be reasonable with you, but clearly that
Interesting.
didn't work. So to your point, the moral compass is, each threat actor has their own, moral compass and limitations on how far they will go for certain things.
Right, right,
But
right, right.
once again, they won't stop. That's the biggest thing. It honestly doesn't matter. They won't stop.
And that's interesting. Man, yeah, and also like from NGM standpoint, like why would you want to publicly blast somebody like something like that? Why give someone motivation to want to get you? Like
Yeah, and at that point, you're talking about a 100, million, if not billion-dollar industry here in the casino world. Tons of money and profit. They thought they had the best, infrastructure in place. They thought they had the best security team in place. They were overconfident. And
Right,
I always tell
right,
people there is never a silver bullet in security. It doesn't exist. If you
right,
found it, it's a unicorn because it literally does not
right,
exist. And
right,
obviously that's why being on the MDR team, I still tell people all the time, there is no guarantee. This is why we now layer on like incident response into our MDR because
hmm,
we have to be prepared for the what if. If we
right,
say
right,
there is never going to be a what if, you're just, shooting at a bucket of water and hoping that you catch a fish. It
right.
doesn't happen very often. So
Right, 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 right. Okay. So like how much harder is it for your team to do your job? Because you do it for both Sophos and non-Sophos customers. So if a customer has Sophos, I'm assuming there's a bunch of data you can already look at. If someone doesn't have Sophos, is there like a bare minimum they must have for your team to be super effective, or can you just use what they have? Like, how does that work?
yeah, it's so obviously if they already run Sophos as like an antivirus tool, so they already have us deployed, but they didn't own any like EDR or MDR doing the monitoring and the research, there's still really valuable logs on the machine. One of the things that I love about our endpoint agent, and a lot of endpoint agents out there, but specifically ours, we journal pretty much every activity that is identified on the endpoint.
Hmm.
That's when you use the XDR tool and you can say, hey, I need the answer of how many IP interactions you've had and what IPs you've talked to, and you can literally run a query and within seconds it's just ripping
Right,
a page out of the journal and loading it to the cloud. So
right, right, right.
for the Sophos customers, super easy to go back. We've got 90 days of historical data that we can easily sift through, look at the detections, XYZ.
Hmm.
For the non-Sophos customers, we have to deploy our endpoint agent. That's how we actually deliver the service. And
Right,
when we do deploy the endpoint agent, we immediately can start running, queries against the endpoint to look for data. The challenge is we get a lot of customers who go in a, full-on panic mode. They wipe their machines, restore to a previous point. Now all of the valuable logs from potentially the last 7 days when the attack was ramping up, those might disappear. So a lot of times we'll rely on their logs from their endpoint if they still have them or maintain them.
right,
But traditionally speaking, a lot of times the biggest thing that the customers care about when they come to us is we got to get back into business. Like we need to be
right,
online. These
right,
next 72 hours are the most critical for us because we're losing, 50, 60, $100,000 a day by not being operational.
right, right.
So their core objective at that point is, hey, we can worry about forensics at a later time. Get us back into functioning order. That's the
Right.
most important thing.
In a situation like that, what do you do? Because what if wiping them is getting them back into, or is that not the answer all the time?
Yeah, so traditionally speaking, I think you probably know this. Backups are the most important thing that anybody could ever do. It
Right.
literally has to be top of mind for so many people that we speak to because backups are critical. There are many times, especially if you don't go through like your cyber insurance and you don't negotiate with the cyber terrorists to actually get the decryption keys.
Hmm.
90% of the time, they don't even work, and they just use it
Right.
again as a method to get more money out of you. Um, More or less, if you don't have the backups, sometimes a rebuild is absolutely necessary. We've dealt with
Right.
quite a few customers, maybe 20, 30 seats. So they got, two servers and a bunch of endpoints. Everything got encrypted. They can't afford to pay the threat actor. And a lot of times financially, it just makes more sense to blow it up and start from scratch. But
Gotcha.
that has to be determined by the individual customer and the end user. We can't obviously make that recommendation. They have to decide what's best for their org. But strategically speaking, if we can help repair, we'll do whatever we can on the current system.
Hmm.
But 9 times out of 10, they're going to restore to a previous point. We're going to immediately deploy the endpoint agent once that restoration occurs. And then we're going to monitor because a lot of times these threat actors, when they see you restore to a previous point, you're not getting rid of them. You're just going back 7 days. They've got footholds, they've got artifacts, they've got persistence
Right.
mechanisms that they've staged. So they can see that machine popping back online. They can see that their call out to that C2 server is still valid. They're going to try again. So this is why
Right.
our rapid response is actually for 45 days, and it's not in an hourly format because we know these threat actors love to target the same people again immediately
Hmm.
after attacking them once because the goal is, hey, they wiped their machines, they think they're safe, turns out they're
Right.
not. Threat actor comes back again, doubles the ransom, and then you're right back into that same rabbit hole.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think that's happened to Henry Schein, that large medical dental company. They've been
Okay.
hacked multiple times, and they post an update saying they fixed it, and then next thing you know, they go down again. I think it was 2 or 3 times over the last 4 months.
Yeah, it's the biggest misconception that anybody could have in this type of industry is, hey, I wiped my machines and I reset my passwords, I'm safe, right? And
Right, right.
I tell people countless times, if you've legitimately been hit with a ransomware attack and you haven't conducted any type of forensics investigation to find every trace of this threat actor,
Hmm.
you did not get rid of them. Because
Right.
they don't just show up, and 2 hours later they attack. They're there for weeks, if not months,
Planning their
staging,
attack.
prepping, monitoring. Yeah, they're doing all the stuff that they have to do. And then the ransomware is you finally being alerted that they're there. That's the whole
Right.
goal. The ransom is, hey, it's time to now hold them hostage. We
Right.
got everything that we wanted.
Right.
So, you know, that methodology of I did my job, I
Hmm.
restored the machines, it's not enough. That's a huge takeaway I can give for anybody
Interesting.
is make sure you conduct forensics.
Interesting. Okay. And there's something interesting you said. So like your team will actually call these hacking groups, and the front desk person is answering, and they're transferred to the billing department. Like these are well structured, organized. They're
Oh
organized
yeah.
gangs at this point. Has there been an uptick in the amount of organized cyber gangs over the last 5 years that, or is it like the same groups that just kind of keep rotating between amongst each other?
We see a lot of old threat acting groups come back, like revivals. Like we had one. I can't remember who it was. They popped up in like 2018 or 2019, went stagnant for a couple of years, and then a lot of these threat actors, what they realize is, hey, everybody else is so worried about these new mechanics and these new techniques. Let's try something old and see if it works again.
Mm-hmm.
You got a lot of the big names in this space, the Contis and the Ryuks, the Lockbits, the Black Hats. Um, but a lot of things have popped up recently. We had one, I think it was Akira, was a ransomware group that popped up not too long ago, and our incident response lead was like, hey, if anybody has a customer that's been hit with Akira, we want it because we want to learn. It's literally, not to
Right.
say it's like exciting for our incident response team, but there is that, hey, I want to be as good at my job as I possibly can. The best way to do that is to actually learn about anything
Mm,
new in that space. So we try to keep up. I would say it's difficult for new groups to really form and build a presence in this space just because it takes a lot of money to do what they do, to be candid.
right.
You're
Right.
talking about staging environments and countless investments into tools and access, and you have to go out in the dark web and you have to buy credentials and buy access, and it costs a lot of money to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately for the smaller organizations, the smaller groups, they can be successful at individual targets, but it's normally the big players, the Lockbits and the Ryuks, the Contis.
Right.
They have a lot more funding, and it's just a lot easier for them to get in, do what they need to do, get out, move on to the next target.
Right. Now, are these groups protected by their own government and there's just no collaboration, or is it a mixture of sometimes yes, sometimes no? It just depends.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're protected by their government, but the challenge then becomes if, and the United States and the FBI have taken a very big step in cyber terrorism over the last couple of years. We've actually, seen a lot of investments, specifically from recently, like the Biden administration towards, countries, um, not to get into any type of intellectual like warfare or anything like that, but there
Right.
are
Right.
other countries out there um, where, we've kind of drawn a line in the sand and said, hey, we're not going to just sit idly by. This is a terrorism attack through
Right.
cyber, through physical, it doesn't matter. This is a terrorism attack. So they've taken a lot of strides on this. I would say, is Russia going to run and go try to arrest people in their country that, are obviously executing cyber terrorism? Maybe yes, maybe no. It really
Right.
depends on, the group, the effect, obviously what the United States could potentially, bring to the table and say, hey, this is a serious matter. We've got to handle this
Right.
with or
Right.
without your help. Um, but it's become a little bit more of a complex situation. I
Mm-hmm.
would say over the last probably 5 to 10 years, it really has become um, a nation state issue now, where we
Right.
really are looking at complex
Right. Right.
countries going after each other and saying, "Hey, we will not allow this anymore. You
Right.
have to understand this." So,
Right. Yeah, I would definitely also add our relationship with that country probably matters a lot because if we're on really good terms with that country, they're probably going to be more willing to help. But if
sure.
if we're not real friendly, then I mean, what's their motivation to go help us at that point?
Yeah, I
right?
can't see, a country that doesn't like us, running to go help us arrest a cyber criminal. It's
Dropping
probably
everything that
not on
they're
the top, not on the
right,
top of their list.
right. Yeah. So, John, this is so fascinating. So, expand a little bit more on your mindset during like an active incident, right? Because at this point, like if there is an active incident, has it already gone through different layers? Like maybe the AV didn't catch it, or maybe it did its job by just journaling and flagging,
Yep.
right? It rolled to MDR. MDR team, I'm guessing, is looking at it and is determining like, okay, something's here. There's a threat actor. It now goes to your team. Like, what's the goal? What's the mindset? Like, how do you handle that?
Sure. So, and let me kind of add some context here, not to obviously toot the Sophos horn, but traditionally speaking, very few incidents when you have MDR in place because they're obviously monitoring as early in the kill chain as possible. We have tons of automation in place to help us escalate activity,
Mm-hmm.
human-led investigations, reviewing the data. The primary end user that comes to us for incident response is traditionally somebody who doesn't own an MDR. We actually have had a few people come to us leveraging other vendors' MDRs that don't have the capability to respond. We've actually had one instance where we had a customer that our early warning system. So for context, we had I call it a pro bono service where our rapid
Mm-hmm.
response team, whenever they find indicators of compromise from an active incident customer, they'll come to us and say, hey, are there any other customers that have reported this behavior that obviously may not have been hit yet?
Mm-hmm.
We actually did outreach to an end user who owned a very large name MDR. Um, they didn't even tell them about the incident. We did it complimentary just by sifting through logs. So
Wow.
what we typically see is, I don't want to say 100% of the time because that
Right.
doesn't exist, but probably upwards of 99% of the time, there is always a detection somewhere telling you bad things are going to happen. And the big
And,
challenge is there's not enough people to monitor every detection, understand its complexity, and
mm-hmm.
be able to determine the legitimacy. That's why people have deployed tools like SIMs, information and event management tools, with the hopes that they can then escalate the behavior. Um, we see a lot of stuff start with the phishing emails and compromised
Mm-hmm.
credentials. Normally, the easiest way for someone to get in is they jump in, they send that one phishing link. Bob in marketing types in his creds thinking it's a legitimate email, and then next thing you know, threat actor has access to potentially an inbox. They can then phish for more credentials. They can test those creds on laptops. Then they get into the network. We see a few firewall breaches every now and again. Network breaches are sometimes, not to say it's the end user's fault, but just poor hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we always promote good IT hygiene, good health, but you know it's an impossible task sometimes to
Sure.
maintain that consistently. So we see it from all different areas. But the biggest thing that I can say to kind of answer that question is there's normally, with the greatest degree of as close to 100% as possible, there's
Mm-hmm.
normally a detection somewhere that
Right.
would have given somebody a heads up that bad things were about to happen.
Right. Okay. And I know Sophos has the XDR capabilities where you can ingest logs from different third party tools,
Mhm.
um, like Cisco Meraki firewalls, for example. I know you're integrated with Duo.
Yep,
Then you have your NDR sensors, right? You have all these different sensors. How important is it that all sensors are deployed properly? Properly accepting the logs. Because if
sure.
and if not having that, how much harder does it make it your job from a proactive standpoint?
When we launched our MDR, we actually launched it with zero integrations. We just used our endpoint agent, laptop, desktop, server, get it on every box that you can. We'll watch, we'll have eyes, boots on the ground, hands on keyboard. We can respond to threats. I think
Mm-hmm.
at the core minimum, that was our goal. And it was the best method of keeping customers safe. Was at the end of the day, you could have a network breach, Cisco Meraki breach, you could have a Duo credential compromise, you could have your Microsoft 365 compromised, Mimecast might not catch something, whatever it is.
Right.
The sole purpose is they want to get in, access your critical assets, harvest potentially data, hold you hostage. That's the
Right.
primary goal.
Right.
So while we didn't need the integrations when we launched, we suddenly realized customers want to be able to confidently send valuable information to a SOC that can be used appropriately. And
Right.
this is why, last November we said, hey, we've got to start getting these integrations out the door. So all of those integrations you listed, and we've got a bunch of them. We wanted to focus on the biggest attack surfaces. So public cloud, identity, email, network,
Right.
firewall, endpoint, and server. That's
Right.
traditionally where we track most of the attacks coming from.
Right.
So our goal was collect data, obviously build out the stack, whether it's using third-party tools, whether it's using Sophos tools, all the data flows into the single data lake. We have tons of logic that helps sift through all that data. No one's reading firewall logs every day. I've yet to talk to somebody legitimately who says, yeah, I get in and from 9 to 5, all I do is stare at firewall logs. Doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. Right.
we wanted to help, and I'll never bash SIMs. I think they spawned up at a very pivotal and critical moment for a lot of security teams because you wanted to go out and get the best in class tools that you could possibly buy, but you had 9 different consoles. I'm not signing into
Right.
9, 10 different consoles, so let's send
Right.
it all to a repo and hope to find things. The problem is SIMs have to be tuned. You have to normally have some type of SIM manager interpreting the data. It can just take a while before that gets off the ground. Our
Right.
integrations immediately upon deployment, they start sending telemetry, gets interpreted, normalized, enriched with third-party intelligence. We have a really cool correlation engine that says, hey, if I see all of these similar entities, so
Mm-hmm.
IP communication coming from the firewall, IP communication on the host, maybe that same IP sent an email to an end user, and we have all of these telemetry streams, rather than making 4, 5, 6 different cases for all of these different activities, let's cluster them together into one single case.
Right.
Makes it a lot easier for the analyst to interpret the severity of the attack. Makes it a lot easier for the end user to understand what's actually going on because they don't have to
Mm-hmm.
track 7, 8, 9 cases. We actually participated in the MITRE attack evaluation for MDR just recently. It was the first one they ever did. There were a lot of vendors that reported, I won't name any names, but
Mm-hmm.
upwards of 360 email notifications for 10 attacks. That's a
Wow.
lot of data to parse through. We did
No,
10
no one's gonna
emails
look through
for
that all that data. There's no way.
yeah, and how do you know which, legitimate, which one do I have to
Right.
chase? What's the
Right.
most important? We did 10 emails for 10 attack steps. We wanted to keep it simple, straight to the point. Here's what we saw. We've determined it's legitimate. We've clustered all the other stuff together. Here's one single
Right.
alert. And we just wanted to do that very well. Having all of those other integrations, it really does create a more unified approach. It gives a lot of our customers so much flexibility to be able to just offload that burden, be like, oh, you guys are going to watch every detection that comes in now and manage
Mm-hmm.
every security event. Um, it really does make a lot of people in the small business space and even all the way up to enterprise. I mean, you might have a 40-person IT team. It's still
Mm-hmm.
a lot when you're managing 30,000, 40,000 machines. 40 people
Right.
isn't enough sometimes. So
Right.
we
Right.
really wanted to help offload that burden for a
Right.
lot of
Right.
people.
No, I agree. We do co-managed IT. We have customers that have gone down the design your own SIM route. It's a lot of work. It is so much work to tune that SIM in, and you're working on all the integrations, and then someone doesn't have quotes set up properly when they're sending the data. Now you're working with a development team to figure out how to fix that.
Yep.
Like it's not a fun process to get your SIM tuned in.
And even think of this, a lot of people are negligent to this fact, but what happens if Mimecast or Cisco or, FortiGate change their naming conventions for their detection logic tomorrow? A SIM's not going to know what those new detections are. And you have to wait for somebody that runs that SIM, the actual company managing the SIM, to interpret those detections in order to escalate the behavior. We've actually figured out a way to make sure in under 24 hours we can identify new detections, map them to MITRE appropriately,
Mm,
understand and interpret the data. Obviously, if a customer has that detection, we're
right.
going to proactively reach out to them, understand how that detection is meaningful in their world, but then we
Hmm.
shape that logic in the back end and we turn that new detection around in under a day. There's never
Right.
really going to be an instance where any vendor could completely change everything and we're
Hmm.
going to be out of loop for like a week or a month. That doesn't
Right.
exist with us, which
Right.
is really nice.
No, that completely is. Can you give an example of where you were ingesting logs from a third party, whether it's like Duo or just or whatever, that led to the early detection and prevention of a security incident?
Yeah, yeah. We actually had a really cool example that happened when we first launched the integrations. We had a customer who set up Mimecast and FortiAnalyzer. So they were sending us email detection logic and firewall detection logic. The Mimecast solution received an email from a suspicious domain, scanned it, saw it was clean, and allowed it through. The end user then clicked the link inside of the email, and the FortiGate firewall actually stopped it because the FortiGate determined that it was actually suspicious. So we got this alert saying, hey, there's an end user inside of a customer's environment that received an email. They clicked the link, and the
Mm-hmm.
firewall stopped it. We ended up going and actually doing research and analysis via our EDR or XDR tool on the endpoints, and we validated very quickly, hey, there are malicious artifacts that were deemed clean that we didn't
Mm-hmm.
interpret as malicious yet, because these threat actors love to use a lot of new techniques, trusted tools, domain generation algorithms to circumnavigate security controls. We ended up going through and we were able to actually investigate and respond and get rid of these artifacts, make sure that they were clean on every asset. And we worked with the end user to ensure, obviously, that they hardened the shell of the email environment. Obviously, the firewall did its job, which was ideal.
Yep.
But it was a really cool scenario. We even had one where this was Duo in place.
Mm-hmm.
There was a single end user that was getting multiple authentication prompts on their phone, like, hey, go ahead and hit the yes button to allow. Luckily, the end user kept tapping no, and we actually had a threshold after I think like the fifth decline. It created a case because we were like, all right, something's wonky here. We ended up doing an investigation. Turns out that their credentials were actually being used in the Netherlands, logging in with username and password.
Mm.
And just having us ingest that Duo information, we were able to see very quickly,
Right.
just in a proactive manner, someone's trying to log in. Not only someone trying to log in, but they legitimately have access to credentials. That is a big time deal, because if they can access creds via like MFA on an email, they could potentially access something that could be a little bit riskier,
Right.
which is like an
Right.
endpoint, a server.
Right.
So
Right.
we were able to actually run to all the assets, harden the shell. We encouraged a quick password reset on that user, and we were able to work with the customer very quickly to kind of get everything resolved. And this is what we love to see with these integrations.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic example. So going back to how that domain was bad, right? How does that benefit the rest of the customer base? Like if one customer's research turns into this is a bad domain, does that knowledge like just spider out and scale to the entire Sophos security
Yeah,
stack, or like what does that look like?
very, very fluidly, actually. So we have a lot of teams. We have detection engineers. We have people in our labs. We have 550,000 customers. We are
Hmm.
collecting an astronomical amount of data across all of our deployed tools, firewalls,
Right.
email gateways, etc.
Right. Right.
So anytime that labs pull something in that seems suspicious, they shoot it over to the MDR team and say, hey, we have a hunch on this. Can you guys do a threat hunt? A lot of times when they find something, so let's say MDR determines that domain's bad or that file's bad, this particular application is malicious,
Hmm.
they'll then invert back to the Sophos Labs team and the detection engineering team and go, hey guys, we've confirmed this is bad. We need to create block logic for all of our other products. Now, obviously, MDR gets
Right.
immediate advantage to that, because if we confirm something is malicious, a lot of times what they'll do is we have the capability to actually query every MDR customer in real time. So we can see in a broad scope who might be under active attack with these particular indicators.
Wow.
Um, and then we can do individual siloed cases and go work them uniquely to make sure that we're not just doing a broad stroke
Right.
generic playbook response for everyone. Every time we implement response, it is manual based off of the uniqueness of a customer. But
Gotcha.
we have the fluidity to update all of our tools. We actually added new logic now for our email and our firewall. We have a clawback feature for our email, which allows us to retroactively pull a bad email out of inboxes once we've confirmed the contents are malicious.
Hmm.
And even our firewall now, we have a feature called active threat response. It actually will allow us to go in without making changes to the firewall rules. We can legitimately apply block logic in real time via a SOC analyst without having to wait for the logic to get updated and sent to the firewall. We can just run
Right.
over to it and take action. So we've had a
Gotcha.
lot of means to use our tools the best way possible.
Gotcha. Now that's very impressive, and that happens within the same day, within the hour. That's a very quick process.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
It's immediate.
Wow.
At the
Right.
analyst that's working the case, they determine that there's risk, and
Right.
then they
Right.
immediately will obviously run to the Sophos tools to apply
Hmm.
block logic if they own them. Anything else, they're immediately communicating with our labs team and our detection engineering
Right.
team to go,
Right.
hey
Right.
guys, this is legitimate. We need to stop this. This was when Hafnium was causing a big ruckus. Web shells were getting spun up all over the place. We actually saw the web shells weeks before Microsoft published the vulnerability notes.
Hmm.
So we were actively killing these web shells. Turns out it was a nation state vulnerability attack. We ended up basically immediately creating new detections for the endpoint agent to flag basically hafnium related web shells and
Right.
automatically stop them moving forward. So there's a lot of collaboration effort that goes in between it, but with
Hmm.
MDR, it's immediate protection. I want to say immediate, but obviously do the investigation, validate it. We're under like
Right.
38 minutes now for response, but
Wow.
you get the drift. We want to move
Yes.
quickly.
Right. Right. Okay. So let's say a customer does have MDR. The team confirms there's a threat actor inside or something malicious happening.
Yep.
Um, Could you walk me through what's your team's next step? Is there like a level of research that has to happen prior to kicking the attacker out? Is it call the customer? Is it just neutralize the threat? Like, what's the mindset behind next steps there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So number one, we give our customers the flexibility to pick what we call a response mode. They can be more in a collaborative state where they want to be notified of things, where our team doesn't take action. We just give them a heads up, and then they can collaborate with us on response. Or you can put us in an authorized mode where, hey, I trust you guys. You're my SOC. I'm giving you hands-on keyboard. Take the keyboard, run with it, and
Hmm.
keep me safe.
Right.
Um, Traditionally speaking, every investigation is led by a human. Normally, we do triaging at the front lines to
Hmm.
understand, build a case note. We follow the OODA loop procedure, so observe, orient, decide, and act. That's our
Hmm.
goal. Follow the steps. It gives the best validation for success.
Hmm.
But once we get in, we build obviously what's the initial observable. Let's orient ourselves around it. So we not playbooks but run books to guide the analysts on what they need to go collect.
Right.
Check process trees and go look at the detections in the console and look at
Hmm.
recent activity, find any potentially rogue or strange applications installed. They go through
Hmm.
a whole procedure to make sure they've checked off the boxes that need to be checked.
Right.
Once they've built that list of observables, they've oriented themselves, then they make a decision, which is, I
Hmm.
believe this is malicious. I believe we need to respond. They'll submit that to either a team lead or a tier two analyst that's
Hmm.
also available to review and make sure and validate that the hypothesis is correct. We've had
Right.
sometimes analysts find, mistakes and say, "Hey, I think you missed something," or, I've seen that before, and they're
Hmm.
able to catch something else. That's why we always have a second set of eyes looking and watching. It just gives
Right.
us the greatest chance for success.
Right.
Um, Response is all audited as well. So if we ever apply any type of response, there's an audit trail that always shows what we've done, why we did it. We apply case notes and logic to the
Hmm.
dashboard so you can follow along. um, we want to be as I would say methodical as possible, but we also understand that time is a very valuable and urgent thing. You give a
Right.
threat actor 2 hours instead of 20 minutes, they can do a hell of a lot of bad things in an
Right.
hour and 40 minutes on mine.
Right.
So
Right. So
um,
what? So what's actually happening, right? Like your team's involved. Are you just kind of analyzing where the case is at to identify next step? And if so, like if the next step's just to kick out the attacker, how come like the level two SOC doesn't just do that,
yeah, so they traditionally will. They'll step in.
right?
Mainly, we don't want anybody implementing a response because we have to remember this is legitimate hands-on keyboard access via command line. So there's
Right.
appropriate RBAC in place to make sure that only the people who are trusted and obviously know the process flow for response handle that.
Right.
But ideally, all of this happens very quickly. So traditionally speaking, in under 20 minutes, we wanted to have triaged and investigated the alert. At that kind of 20-ish minute mark, then it's
Mhm.
up to the interpretation of the tier two or obviously the team lead to go, yeah, we need to obviously take action. It could be killing a process, it could be deleting an artifact,
Right.
blocking an IP address. Maybe they added a
Hmm.
registry key for a persistence, mechanism in a week to try and
Hmm.
do the same attack again. So they want to make sure they review everything because we want complete resolution. That's the goal.
Right.
Um, at the end of the day, if you put us in authorized mode, we want to identify the risk and take action as fast as we possibly can. But we
Right.
want to do it under the guise that there is a business that is trusting us to make sure they can still operate as a business. We don't want to
Right.
run on a hypothesis and isolate a production server that's processing payments for a company, and all of a
Right.
sudden that they can't process payments anymore for an hour, and they just
Right. Right. Right.
so we have to be very cautious and careful with what we do and how we do it. um, I'm never going to sit here and say that there's never been a false positive before.
Right.
The good thing about human-led investigations is that we have the ability to be very tactful,
Hmm.
but there's always opportunities for us to learn. We take advantage of them. We
Right.
understand how we can grow, and we obviously implement that logic into the next step.
Right. Right. No, that makes total sense. Yeah, that's just wild that you move that fast. And because Sophos is journaling everything, you don't necessarily have to worry about preserving the current system, because if Sophos is already on there, you have that journaling data. You can go back as far as, the logs are saved, or is
Yeah,
that
we
kind of
can
how
go
it
back
works?
upwards of 90 days. So we have a really good opportunity to be able to historically track what is actually happening inside of the
Right.
environment. Um, it also helps us. We actually have upwards of like a 1 year data retention option now. So a lot of
Which,
times we can help satiate like compliance requirements if you need more than 90 days.
right.
Um, but at the end of the day, and this is a really good thing for us too. Let's say, looking at Hafnium again, I keep using that example, but um, they got compromised in January. They didn't publish it until early March. So, being able to retroactively go back in time and see if indicators were present is hugely valuable.
Right.
Understanding, hey, this vendor just got hit. There's a brand new vulnerability that dropped. We can run queries going back upwards of 90 days, if not longer, and look at
Hmm.
customers and see if they've historically been impacted by a compromise that just now got published.
Right. Right.
And this is
Right.
a really, really useful thing for our team because we can legitimately, hey, that IP was safe 2 weeks
Hmm.
ago. It is now on a known indicator of compromise list associated with an attack. Let's go back and look at everything that IP did. Did it plant any tools? Did it do anything successfully? That's just the nature of the businesses. There are going to be trusted mechanisms that turn bad at some point.
Right.
Being able
Right.
to go back and actually monitor that successfully is huge, and it really does help the fact that the
Right. Right.
endpoint journals it all, and it's
Right.
immediately accessible within milliseconds. So
Right. Right. Okay. I have two questions. They're both completely unrelated. So back to the SIM is
mhm.
technically, if you have MDR complete, there's some compliancy that requires that you have a SIM. Does that
Yep.
meet that box? Does that solidify that requirement?
Yeah, so that question is normally a fun one that you got to take a step back because there are SIM vendors, and then there are compliance requirements that ask for security events to be managed and stored. There are some insurance policies that ask, do you employ a SIM? There's so many different routes that it can go. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, what is a SIM? It's an information and event management tool. It is a
Hmm.
repository for security events. We check that box. You
Right.
send us firewall data, you send us, duo identity detections, you send us endpoint and server detections. We're tracking, cataloging, and storing all security events for a set period of time. It
Right.
100% satiates that requirement.
Right.
Are there going to be finicky fine lines where some people might say, well, I need an actual SIM,
Hmm.
managed a syslog server where you can go? Obviously, you might run into some, very strenuous requirements for certain pieces, but
Right.
I would say traditionally speaking, 99% of the time plus, there really isn't going to be an issue utilizing our capabilities with third-party ingestion of data as your information and event management tool.
Gotcha. So, in short, for those listening, it should work, but take a step back, consult your legal team, and make sure that it meets all those requirements.
Yeah, at the end of the
Okay.
day, just always, dot the I's and cross the T's. You never
Yeah.
want to assume, and this is the challenge. Compliance and insurance, sadly, it's all interpretation. It's all
Right.
how you interpret what they're asking.
Right.
Um, so it's under the guise, and you got to remember, probably a large majority of people that are out there self audit. They don't have
Hmm.
anybody coming in to audit their compliance protocol and make sure they're actually
Right.
achieving success. They're
Right.
going in and saying, yeah, I did that. Oh, I did that. I did that. And it's only until something happens when you go through that formal review process that
Hmm.
somebody might slap your hand and say, hey, you're not doing that correct. You might get a fine,
Right.
whatever it could be.
Right.
Um, So really interpret it. Obviously, anybody can reach out to you. You guys can communicate with us, and we can all get in a huddle together and review
Right.
the requirement, understand, and make sure we can satiate it. That's why we're
Right.
here, and that's why
Right.
we're here to
Right.
help. So,
Gotcha. So I have a question on a more recent attack. So
uh-huh.
Boeing was recently breached by the Lockbit ransomware gang. Uh, Shortly after that happened, Boeing worked with CISA and the NSA, and they came up with like, "Hey, here's how you fix the Citrix bleed vulnerability."
Yep.
So it's thought that this came from the 0-day Citrix bleed. So in a situation like that, like what does that look like from an MDR perspective? If there's an MDR, or let's say Sophos is running on a server that has an active 0-day like Citrix bleed, and
Mhm.
now the vulnerability is being attacked for malicious reasons.
What does
Like
that look
what are
like?
the yeah what, like what
Yeah.
does that look what does that look like? How Why was Boeing hacked? Is it because they don't have an MDR? Is it because the MDR missed it? Or is it because maybe the hack just somehow gave them admin access and it's hard to track down if an admin's making changes? Like what does that in a nutshell look like?
Yeah. So Citrix is an entire beast that sometimes has to get unraveled. But the reality of a Citrix-based world is a lot of times in a physical or virtual environment, there's not going to be any type of true endpoint or EDR protection deployed to it. That's the challenge. So you're
Mm-hmm.
relying on the vendor to have done their proper hygiene and hardening to get that done successfully. And apologies if you can hear the dogs. I think they're seeing a
We're animal
squirrel out
lovers around here. Let them get it.
there. But when you rely on that style of approach, I actually had a customer where they said, "Hey, we run Citrix. Um, my building could literally burn down, and in 4 hours I can be up, online and operational." And I was like, "Well, how did you get that done? How could you do that?" And he's like, "Well, we have other sites where we could easily just shift all of our stuff to." I said, "What if all your buildings burn down?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think of that." And it's so
Right.
common for people to just put faith in something that they believe is successful or that they can trust.
Right.
Um, with Boeing, and obviously I don't want to speak on behalf of Sophos in regards to the Boeing scenario.
Right.
We got to be cautious of that.
Sure.
But we have to understand any threat actor can abuse any existing and legitimate connection to take
Mm-hmm.
advantage of an environment. This is why the supply chain attacks are so dangerous now, is because you're in a position where you could be using trusted tools that you've had in your world for a long time, and bad things can happen. This is why
Right.
MDR has become so important, because
Right.
by monitoring all of the different MITRE attack steps, from initial access to discovery, to
Mm.
credential abuse to execution, that entire chain, there's a lot of breadcrumbs that threat actors will leave. We
I,
have to understand this, and
right.
it helps us be successful.
I'm starting to see a theme in what you're talking about. So most of the detections you're doing, does that tie back to that MITRE framework? Is that kind of like the central playbook from a security posture standpoint?
I mean, we use any tools that we can, and MITRE
Sure.
is a big one. I mean, you got to think. One thing that I would say we've learned, especially talking about like a 0-day vulnerability, is the compromise and the exploit will always happen no matter what you do. But the
Mm-hmm.
threat actors, once they get inside, they traditionally use the same attack means over
Right.
and over and over again. They don't have these brand new tools that no one's ever seen before. They're traditionally abusing the trusted tools that people have deployed to their systems because it's the easiest access.
Right.
So we rely on MITRE as a really good framework for evaluating what techniques and tactics threat actors could potentially use. And
Mm-hmm.
then by interpreting that, we have the ability to actually go in and say, hey, regardless about what the vulnerability is, we are in a post exploit, you know, mechanism
Right.
right now. We have
Right.
to monitor for post exploit behavior.
Right.
What are they going to do? Traditionally, a lot of the stuff that our MDR team is looking out for. So
Right.
this is why we tell people all the time. I mean, I remember all these 0 days that we've lived through. Print Nightmare and
Mm-hmm.
you know Proxy Shell and Log4j. People call us all the time and they go, "Hey, we don't know what to do. We know we got compromised, but we don't know what to do now." We work very, very quickly to try and get as many people on MDR as fast as possible, because yes, you've been exploited or compromised. That no one is safe from an exploit or a compromise. It doesn't
Right.
the silver bullet comes back. There is no silver bullet.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stop Bob in marketing from giving away his creds. There is nothing in the world that can prevent that.
Right.
So for us, and this is why I said at the beginning, we relied on our endpoint and server as the baseline for our MDR. No matter what happens, us living on those boxes gives us the best opportunity to track post-exploit behavior,
Right.
jump in, and respond. So
Right.
we treat all 0 days the same.
Right.
Not
Right.
to
Right.
be insensitive, but hey, we know you're going to get compromised. It's not that we don't care about it. That's why we have all of these different integrations now to maybe track compromise before it occurs.
Right.
But we have to be, very blunt and say, we know at some point you might get compromised. We're ready for it no matter
Right.
what and when that happens.
Right, right. So, how does the power of MDR meet the 0 day? Like, is that also not a silver bullet? You still just don't know when it comes to a 0 day that's running, an MDR suite.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking the $1 million question, which is, hey, can you find something that doesn't exist yet? And that's the challenge
Right,
for us is we
right,
can't find it until it exists. Now, the good thing about MDR is once again, post-exploit activity doesn't change. So
right,
we have the ability a lot of times to track post-exploit activity and stop it before a 0 day is even published. There were multiple times of recent, within the last year or two where we've seen stuff weeks before a published vulnerability, and we've actually prevented damage, not
right,
even knowing that it was associated with a 0 day.
right,
So by us focusing so heavily on the post-exploit behavior, it gives us such a strategic opportunity rather than
right,
waiting for the exploit to drop and then going, okay, now obviously during 0 day, we have a active adversary team that's basically running nonstop doing threat hunts across anything that could be risky. I want to say we ran upwards of like 200 or 300 threat hunts within the last 12 months alone, just
wow,
chasing anything underneath a stone that looks risky or associated with a potential
right,
vulnerability. Um, and in that scope, their job is find every breadcrumb, every indicator of attack behavior and compromise. Do whatever you can possibly do to bolster the detection engineering team so that way they can go out and create queries that look for all those indicators to
mm-hmm,
rapidly find any of those footholds. So
right,
we automate a lot of the process, but at the end of the day, once again, humans run the investigations. This is a human led active adversary team. They have to go out, they have to follow, funnily enough, former Twitter or X now, one of the best threat intelligence feeds ever because it's real time active reporting of, you know, adversaries and
yeah,
vulnerabilities.
yeah,
And having that intelligence in a legitimate, security operations team's hands is hugely valuable because, there is no off time to be candid for us. We're 24/7,
right,
365 follow the sun, and we have to do that for both, known threats and unknown threats. We're always on the hunt looking for anything that's new.
right. Few points to break down there. One, I agree with you.
Sure.
We definitely spend time on X from a cybersecurity standpoint because you do get great news, uh, and not just news there from like a cybersecurity standpoint, but like there's some accounts we follow. They'll break down like step by step exactly how they're unfolding some of these attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Someone over the last couple months found some vulnerability in Windows Defender and was able to add exclusions. I think it was the Microsoft team. There was something about you could launch attacks out of the Microsoft team, like a cached folder, because that was automatically being
Okay.
excluded. Um, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. It also sounds like going back to what you said. Once your team learns of the threat, you could protect the entire customer base. So, from a 0 day standpoint, maybe the name of the game is just don't be first. Because if if you have enough attack surface reduction strategy, where you hold it off just long enough for someone else to take the hit first, then you might actually be okay.
Yeah, at the end of the day, and I tell people all the time because I've been approached by so many customers, and they're like, "Yeah, vendor A told me they've never had someone be compromised before." I'm like, that's a flat out lie. Like it doesn't exist.
We won't say
It
names,
doesn't
but I've
exist.
seen I've seen that marketing, and everybody on the X infosec will just laugh like, "Oh, let's all go home now." It's
Yeah,
like,
like you're advertising this unicorn that doesn't exist. So,
right,
yeah, maybe you're the first person that has or shows sign of compromise, but traditionally speaking, it's the ones that don't have MDR that typically
right,
experience the rougher signs of that because they
right,
aren't legitimately prepared to handle what happens after the fact.
right, right,
Um,
right,
it's just it's a tip crypto game, we try to do our best to educate people as much as possible.
Hmm.
Obviously MDR, it's an investment, it costs a little bit more, um, but in the long run, we've saved so many customers. I
Oh yeah.
remember going back to Hafnium again. I mean, we were answering, you know, 60, 70, 80 calls a day of people just ringing, going, "Hey, like I can't go to bed. I don't know if my business is next." And we're just
Right.
rapidly onboarding people to MDR. We normally
Hmm.
don't under active incident. That's kind of our rule is if you are under active attack, you can't onboard to MDR
Right.
because it's a pre-existing incident. It's got to be cleaned up first. But
Right.
a
Right.
lot of times in these 0 days, we make exceptions for people because,
Right.
hey, yes, you've been compromised, but you're not under active attack yet. You're
Right.
you're just you're exposed. The front door was open. You
Right.
don't know if somebody walked in yet, but you
Right.
can verify that the front door was open
Right.
and nobody told you about it until 3 months later. Let's just go ahead and close the door. Let's send a security unit inside, make sure everything's clear, and then moving
Right.
forward, we're going to make sure that front door doesn't open again.
Right.
So we do our best to help in those times, but it's just it's the challenge of, hey, I've never experienced a cyber attack. Why do I need to buy hurricane insurance if we've never had a hurricane? And then sure enough, the hurricane comes and you're beating yourself going, dang it, I should have bought that insurance when I had the chance. And
Yeah. It happens. It's so weird too how it's like nobody has the budget, and then you're hacked, and then it's like, well, why didn't we install this yesterday? The budget's right here. It's just like I had a customer. We said, hey, you need to get because we obviously we sell Sophos and we're a gold partner now. We wanted to get them on MDR complete with the full suite, and they said, Brian, no one would fall for that. Nobody would ever fall for that. And I kid you not, a few weeks later, they're emailing me like at 3 a.m. asking for gift cards. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, you were compromised, right? Um,
yep.
and then they moved forward. They pulled the trigger and said, let's do this. We implemented fast.
So traditionally, what we found is most businesses have a disaster fund that it's just kind of like the money's in there. It doesn't exist for anything else other than disaster. A lot
Right.
of times that budget is not nearly what it needs to be. Cyber insurance has become not only unbelievably expensive, it's almost nearly impossible now to get insured after an incident. Before an incident occurs, you've got to fill out these questionnaires that are becoming 10, 12, 14 pages for some people. People are starting to even reassess, am I spending my money well on cyber insurance now?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some really strategic partners in the insurance space. Number one, we are not insurance salespeople. I have to state that
Yep.
explicitly. Sophos does not sell insurance. um, but one of the things that we love is there's actually a vendor that we partnered with called Cysurance. They are a very risk reduction focused vendor where they really understand that, hey, we don't want to increase prices because 95% of our customer base is irresponsible and they keep getting hit. So what they've
Mm-hmm.
actually done is they basically said, if you're using Sophos MDR, we're going to give you discounts on your cyber insurance, heavily discounted rates,
That's
because we
amazing.
understand that the risk of you getting hit is so significantly lower because you're on MDR, specifically Sophos's MDR. Um, we're starting to see a shift in the dynamic of people reassessing their funds and understanding, are the outcomes that are being generated valued at the investment being made. And a
Right.
lot of people are starting to realize very quickly, maybe my investments in a very overly priced cyber insurance policy isn't the best way to keep my business running and operational.
Right.
Um, and we're starting to see people ditch cyber insurance and
Mm-hmm.
buy, MDR, because they know MDR is actually going to keep my business running. Cyber insurance is just going to help me recover it once it's, crashing
Right.
and burning.
Right.
So,
Right.
and once again, I'm not here to badmouth the insurance game at all. That is not the stance from Sophos to bash any cyber insurance as well. But
But
this
it
is the
takes a certain
landscape, and
mindset. It takes a certain mindset to be able to be
yeah,
tech savvy and understand cyber. And then, I could get that. I mean, their goal is to obviously make money but protect their customers. So that's awesome. That's good.
once again, you have to be prepared for the what if,
Right.
and cyber insurance is a really good way to make sure you are prepared.
Right.
But if the cost outweighs the benefit, at what point do you realize maybe this isn't the best investment for me?
Right.
The
Right.
partnerships that we have now across multiple insurance vendors, everything that we're really trying to do is encourage better IT hygiene, better health, and then
Mm-hmm.
overall, we want to encourage potential rate reductions in any way possible. And if that means
Hmm.
investing in better security tools to
Hmm.
reduce the costs, it's a win-win for a lot of people, because they
Right.
can take the money that they're saving from the insurance that they're spending, invest it. I've seen some people pay for their MDR year over year by
Hmm.
switching off of their current insurance provider. I've legitimately seen this happen with one person where they were like, I spent more on cyber insurance and now I'm paying for my MDR and I'm legitimately safe now. I'm not just having
Right.
that safety net. So,
Right.
but it's a unique game. I can tell you this much. I never thought 16 months ago that I would be talking insurance as much as I do. I never thought I would read as many insurance questionnaires as I have.
Right.
But I mean, it is significantly a bigger part of our customers' life than we ever assumed, and
Hmm.
it's only getting more aggressively worse for a lot of them. So
Right.
we've tried our best to really educate ourselves on insurance, what it means, how it impacts our end users, how can we help in that
Hmm.
insurance space. Um, Really huge strides over the last, you know, year, and it's just a really nice thing to know that we can legitimately help people in more than just security tools. So we've
Right.
really kind
Right.
of spread our wings on that piece.
Right. Where, given your expertise in this, like, where would you say the balance is from like great cybersecurity tools versus what I call the lost art of reducing the attack surface overall? You could also attribute that to good hygiene. Are we relying too much on cybersecurity tools to pick up the slack for misconfigurations that lead to these incidents?
There is not a cybersecurity tool that can fix misconfigurations. I can tell you that much. So this is shared responsibility model is something I preach to every customer I talk to.
Right.
I will literally get on a call with someone and tell them, if you are expecting to purchase an MDR and have it solve all of your problems, it won't. That
Right.
is not how this works. Will we free up an exponential amount of time so you can focus on all the other things that you need to? Absolutely. And I think that's the goal, and that's what people want is, hey, I don't have to stare at a firewall screen and an endpoint antivirus screen and an email screen anymore. Now I can
Hmm.
go actually tune the tools, make sure that they're working correctly, go tackle other projects. Like, that's the goal. There is
Right.
no easy button for security. It doesn't work that way. Obviously,
Right.
teams like you
Right.
guys are making life easier for people. That's what we
Right.
want to do, is make life easier for people.
Right.
But the job doesn't stop once you deploy a security tool. There are
Right.
multiple things. We actually were just talking with we had a big conversation on our team about VMware and like ESXi. They
Hmm.
have a very hardened operating system where you actually can't deploy a V2. And one slip up in a misconfiguration with an exposed ESXi hypervisor, your whole world could crumble in a matter of
Right.
seconds.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with proper security tools. That has nothing to do with the best. You could go spend, I could give you a blank check, and you
Hmm.
can't fix improperly configured tools. That's the
Right.
biggest thing I stress with
Right.
people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's got to be a balancing act, 100%.
Right. Yeah, there was a CISA report where they went over the top 10 ways that they are seeing people get breached. And one of them was just misconfigurations such as a default username and a password, right? Like these hardware and software vendors are shipping out, whether it's a camera, a phone, some piece of, technology with default creds and,
Admin and like password 12345 6,
boom,
and yeah, and
right?
some
So
people don't
it's
even
like,
change them.
right. And so I agree with what you're saying on the shared responsibility, because in that report, they were calling on the software and hardware manufacturers to put different processes in place. Like with Dell, it used to be a standard username and password for the iDRAC. Well, when you're on the iDRAC, that's like you're physically in front of the server, right? That's not good. You could mount ISOs. There's a lot of things you could do, but now they'll ship it with, a little pull-out tab that has like a unique username and password. So some are definitely taking steps in the right direction.
Yeah,
Um,
it's necessary. And just to kind of round off that conversation, one of the things that we always encourage is just be involved. It's the biggest thing I can stress. I've spoken with
right.
so many people. They haven't signed into their security console in like 6 months because they just say, "Hey, I didn't get an email, so nothing's bad." It, be involved, and I'm not trying to tell people, "Hey, you have to spend every waking moment of your day. That's why you go with services like MDR to kind of offload that burden, but
Right.
maintain a level of shared responsibility. It will
Right.
make you successful. It will help you avoid what I call are the RGEs of the world, the resume generating events. Nobody wants them. Nobody wants to experience it. And it's the biggest thing that I tell people all the time is, and I told you, like 99% of the stuff is very avoidable if you're
Right.
just involved
Right.
and you know
Right.
what to look for. If you don't know what to look for, we've got people that can help with that. But even the minimal amount, I mean, we don't get the team's message from Bob in marketing saying, "Hey, I think I got this weird note on my computer." Or, "Hey, I think I may have given away my creds." Communication with the SOC is key.
Right.
Communication with your security vendors is key. Understanding and interpreting what's changed, what's new, what can I do different. You
Right.
know, posture reviews and health checks, they're so important. Use them, take advantage of them, communicate with your vendors appropriately, be responsible in that light. It'll make your life much better.
100%. Did you ever see that meme? It's a kid and his dad. They're sitting at a park, and the dad has his arm around the kid, and the kid's crying, and the kid looks
Oh
up and
yeah,
said, "So, Dad, was this a 0 day attack?" And the dad's like, "No, son, it was another open RDP port."
I'm telling you. Um, PSA once again, not the official stance on Sophos from this one, but if you can use something else besides RDP, I heavily encourage it. Um, so many people just leave. It's just exposed to the internet. You have
Right.
to remember when you are leveraging RDP, you are exposing yourself potentially to the internet. And if you
Right.
don't shut it off after, super
Yeah.
open and accessible
Yeah.
entry point for anybody to get in. Um, it's caused a lot of headache for a lot of our end users. We've done a lot of incident response engagements, and many of them have come back with RDP being exposed. This
Exposed.
is one
Right.
thing that we actually leverage with our MDR team. Is obviously you could easily jump on Shodan today and find exposed RDP machines out there in the world. Like it's not
Right.
hidden.
Right.
Anybody
Right.
can
Right.
track
Right.
this stuff down. So um, don't. I'm not saying don't use RDP, but secure
I'm
your
with you.
remote access, please.
Yeah. Don't open it up on the WAN, and ask
Yep.
yourself if you actually need those ports enabled on the local side as well. It's like we have a customer who's still a customer, and me and him became really good friends. But when we first took over his IT, he had an open RDP port forwarding from the firewall to a 2008 box. And I said, "You can't do that." He goes, "But Brian," he showed me, he found some random piece of software he installed that
Okay.
after like 5 failed login attempts, it would like block that IP temporarily by writing the firewall rule, and then after a certain amount of time undo it. And so in
Okay.
his mind, he's like, "Brian, I got this piece of software. I'm secure. Let me look at this." And you
Ah,
look, you couldn't even keep count of all the failed login
how
attempts.
many?
And I was
Oh my
like,
gosh.
and so that I was like, "Hey, if we're going to work together, it's like you're going to get a real security appliance. And we're not doing this anymore." And he was like,
Yeah.
"I trust you. Just do what you got to do."
I want to say not too long ago, we had an integration um, case pop up where we were able to determine very quickly that an SSH brute force attempt was actually occurring because one of the machines in question, we looked it up online and it was exposed via RDP. And
Mm,
it's one of those things. I think we had another one where like port 22 was, hey, go ahead and use that SSH, log in, have at it. Um,
right,
and
right.
and it's just something where we do our best to help with that.
Mm,
Shameless plug, but we're actually going to be bringing to the table some really good vulnerability management assistance coming down the pipe very soon from the Sophos team. So, our goal was obviously, where do we start? Do we focus on risk assessment or do we do risk mitigation? And I think at the end of the day, we wanted to focus on mitigation because it doesn't matter how pretty the reporting
I
tells you
like
you got
that.
9,000 vulnerabilities. If you don't go close the windows, you're still going to
Right,
be in trouble. And if you find out the window was open for 7 days, you're still going to be in trouble. So
right,
we
right,
started with mitigation of risk, protect our customers first. That's the core
right,
goal.
right.
Now we get into a position where it's like, hey, we've got these integrations to help assess risk in greater areas. What about vulnerabilities as a key
Right.
gap? Right now we're obviously monitoring things like patch status and etc. But
Mm-hmm.
that was one area that we were really, really excited to get our I would say our foot in that pool, if you will. And coming very soon, that's going to be something that we can bring, for our customers is to now what we feel is kind of complete that full circle,
For
really
sure.
kind of solidify the security gap, if you will.
Right. Yeah. No, we're excited about that. We've used a couple, and we're kind of holding off, waiting to see what pops out from Sophos. So yeah, we can't wait. One thing that we've definitely run across. It's so weird, right? Because at the end of the day, it's humans that are running these IT infrastructures. And sometimes you meet super technical people, but a lot of times I have found people that are in charge of this IT budget, and they just like to tinker. It's not actually even about the end result, right? The next thing you know, it's like, hey, I'm going to install Cisco Umbrella because they're going to do my DNS, and then I'm going to install
Yep.
a separate AV to do my antivirus. And as that expands, they have like 6 or 7, 8 different technologies. No one's talking to each other. To set up a SIM is very expensive. They wouldn't do it anyway. And it blows my mind on how they can get away with that. And I think it's just, I don't know if they don't know any better, or if it's because it's
It,
fun to play with all these different techs, but it's so overly complicated at that point.
Yeah, you got to remember there's a political structure in place with a lot of companies where people bring to the table the tools they used in the past because they like that vendor. So they want to
Right.
encourage it in the next,
Right.
deployment cycle, the next renewal cycle. Um, Perfectly acceptable. But the challenge is to your point, no one's managing all of this stuff
Hmm.
adequately. I think the mindset was maybe
They're
15
not.
years ago, hey, buy best in class and then use a sim to manage it all. And it just doesn't work anymore. It
Yeah.
honestly just doesn't work.
Yep.
So, I'm not going to sit here and tell people. I get on calls all the time and I talk to customers and I'm like, hey, listen, you keep the tools that you love. We can work with them. But I do want you to recognize the capabilities from a single vendor perspective that we bring. There are not a lot of MDRs in the market that offer the breadth of an ecosystem of products that we offer. It is a
Hmm.
very, very small group of vendors in the thousands of MDRs that have spun up the
Right.
I call them pop-up socks, if you will, because
Sure.
it's a legitimate offering. Hey,
Right.
I've got a really good group of people. Let's go stand up a SIM. We'll let our
Right.
customers send the data to the SIM, and then we'll kind of manage the information for them. Valuable option.
Sure.
Um, the challenge then becomes, where are they getting their threat intelligence? What tools are they using to implement response? How effective are they
Hmm.
going to actually be? So for us, this single vendor approach is so nice now, and a lot more people are adopting it strictly because we're in a day and age now where I don't want to have to sign into 8 different consoles anymore. I mean, this is just the
Right.
reality. I
Right.
don't want
Right.
to have
Right.
to go through 8 different renewal cycles and 8 different, license key registrations, and I have to go to, my, budgeting team and ask them 9, 10 different
Right.
times for all of it. You bring it to a single vendor and you go, hey, this is what a lot of people have started to adopt is, Sophos can do email, they can do firewall, they can do
Hmm.
antivirus on endpoint and server, we can do ZTNA, we can do, public cloud. A lot of people are starting to realize, especially in the MDR adoption, all of those things just automatically go to the SOC. All of the data goes to
Hmm.
the single data lake that's being inspected and managed by the Sophos SOC.
Right.
And it's one of those things where everyone used to be, so I'm not putting all of my eggs in one basket. I want defense in depth. I want layers. I want different vendors catching things that other vendors don't. And they're suddenly starting to realize, like, this is a nightmare that I've walked
It,
myself into. I
I
can't I can't manage all
I
of this
agree.
stuff anymore.
I 100% agree. I mean, to give you an example, we have a customer, 550 employees, half Windows, half Mac. They have a SIM,
Mm-hmm.
and there are 6 installs for each endpoint that need to be managed. And it's so complex that they literally had to outsource to us. And all we do is we write install scripts, we troubleshoot why installations fail, we make sure it's updated. They have 6 different contracts to manage, 6 different relationships, all these different installs. It doesn't install. We're troubleshooting.
Mm-hmm.
But they've signed long-term agreements. And
Yeah,
so, right. And so there's one example of like, and if you ask me, do they think they're secure? They know they have a problem. They know they have a problem because they're so reactive and there's not one throat to choke. It's just, who do you blame? Is it because Cisco missed the DNS? Is it because the
yeah.
EDR? It's like, so
And you
I'm
gotta
with
you
you.
gotta be very careful because nobody wants their baby to be called ugly. Everyone that makes investments that they believe is the best for their
Right.
business, and
Right.
sometimes It's a not fun bullet to bite. Sometimes you have to maybe recognize, take a step back, and this is why I've kind of shifted. I used to call myself an engineer, but I kind of call myself more of a security advisor now because I want to assess your world,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to see if there's a way that I can make it better for you and easier. At the same time, potentially
Right.
saving you from managing multiple different consoles, multiple different renewal periods,
Mm-hmm.
and having to, hey, if I'm in the middle of an incident, I got to go run and talk to the Cisco guy, and then go call,
Right.
the Mimecast guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. The other challenge really is, it's not the easiest to swap firewalls. So I get it. Some people are like,
Right.
hey, I've had this infrastructure for 10 years. You're wanting me to switch to a vendor I don't, have never used.
Right.
Um, but we're here to help. Like, we've got teams that help with these migration paths, and they can copy your rules, and they can bring
Right.
over everything that you have existing. Just don't be afraid of the change. That's the biggest thing that I'll stress with anybody listening is there's always an opportunity to do some things better.
Right.
Unfortunately, it might mean different, but you've got to keep up with these threat actors because
Right.
they're changing, they're modifying, they're augmenting their approach. And,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of, hey, I don't want all my eggs in one basket, because I feel that this defense in depth method is better.
Right.
Sometimes you really take a step back and you go, man, like I could save myself 40-50% of my workload if I just
Mm-hmm.
went to this approach. Like, it's literally, you could find opportunities to make life so much easier if you switched the mindset a little bit.
Right. Right.
And I face this all the time where people are like, hey, my CTO loves Fortinet. We are a Fortinet shop.
Right.
You're not going to convince that team to switch off of Fortinet.
Right.
But you have opportunities to show value over time. Listen,
Right.
guys, let's, from an MDR perspective, let's ingest the Fortinet data.
Right.
But what if I told you that I could save you money, simplify your day to day, and at the same time automate response to your firewall? Now, from a numbers perspective, the
Mm-hmm.
finance guy who likes something is now going, so you could potentially save me money
Right.
in multiple different areas, save my team time, which means I could in turn have them turn around and invest their time and be more productive and efficient.
Right.
Once you start to make it make sense financially, a lot of times you can have that trigger point where people start to go, maybe I do need to adopt a different approach. So
Right. I agree. No, I agree. One of our largest customers, that was their biggest challenge when we were trying to get them to go 100% Sophos, was they didn't want all their eggs in one basket. But once we kind of went through the mindset you just said, they decided to take the plunge with us, and it's worked out very, very, very well for them. Yeah, they're very happy
that's
with it all.
that's awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, that's all we want is, my goal is, number one, I want to save people. I think that's the biggest one. So I've really kind of, I never used to be this, I would say, um, passionate about it because I never
Mm-hmm.
really was involved. Like, just for me, historically, I would say 5 years ago, I wasn't even in cyber. I want to say probably 4 years
Right.
ago, I wasn't in cyber.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Jumped into, an engineer role, came over to Sophos, and, literally right when I joined, we launched our rapid response service. So I immediately went from just like, hey, I'm this guy who doesn't know what Active Directory is, to then being an engineer, to now I am, a managed service engineer, also involved in incident response.
Right.
And I don't want to say you become numb to it, because I always empathize with everybody that I talk to, but after a couple hundred times talking to people who are dealing with the worst day of your life, you
Mm-hmm.
suddenly start to realize how important MDR is. I've
Right.
had people who were literally a day away from the PO getting processed for buying MDR, and they got hit with an incident. And it's just like, sometimes I feel so bad because I'm like,
Right.
oh my gosh, like that's horrible. And we've actually helped a lot of people in that light, like
Mm-hmm.
not trying to charge them for like
Right.
incident
Right. Right.
response. Like, hey, we're so sorry that happened. You were literally there. The payment was already processed. Let's try to help you out a little bit on this. Maybe give you a break on the cost just to
I
make
think
sure
that goes such
you're
a
good.
long way. That's good customer service. You guys will actually step in and just help still. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
we've had many times where, even people on our MDR, they didn't deploy to every machine. A couple of machines got hit. Normally we have to charge extra, but because they would have to go to the incident response team. But a lot of
mm-hmm.
times, like our VP and our I would say manager of the MDR team has reviewed a lot of these sometimes and said, hey, we'll help you guys out, but you got to do better next time.
Right.
Um, that's obviously an interpretation of negligence, and what do they
Yes.
actually do? Was it meaningful? Or how involved have they been? We take some things into account, but our goal
Right.
is, and mine's always been, I really want to do my best to help people protect
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Because you talk to some people, like you can hear it in their voice. They're like, I'm gonna get fired for this. Like I'm gonna lose my job because
Yeah.
of this, and it hits you after a while where you're like, man, this is, you get put in that position where you're like, this is no joke. Like this is livelihood. I made the joke about the RGE, the resume generating event before, but it's legitimate. This
Mm-hmm.
is, an industry that it can gut you, both from an hours perspective. I have so many people. I asked them like, who's on call, and they're like, me. I always have this thing attached to my hip because if anything happens, no matter what time of day, you're getting the phone. You're getting the call. Hey, I need you to come in, fix this, do that. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
we're in a different landscape now, or at least for myself, I've never experienced that before. And you
Right.
start to answer these calls, and people are just like, hey, this is not good. Like my business could close because of this. Like legitimate business that you may have had for 30 years. I actually had um, a person in my life who was associated with my parents. Um, she runs her own business, and they were having a conversation, and my parents were like, yeah, my son's in cyber, he actually deals with like this kind of stuff. So she gave me a call, and she was like, yeah, my email got jacked. They started making charges on all of my credit cards. um, Turns out that her entire business was being ran from a single MacBook. So all of her customer data,
Mm-hmm.
social security numbers, because she was in the healthcare industry. I mean, her life literally imploded on her in real time. And I think she's back and working and operational again. I tried to help her as much as I could. She kept trying to like pay me. I was like, no, you're fine. Like we
Right.
got you here. I'll do what I can to help you. Um, but it's just it can be gut wrenching to see some of that stuff evolve.
Right.
And obviously, you being in that position, I'm sure you've seen it time and time again, where it's just kind of unavoidable. But um, it's an interesting shift because I always try to be like the happy-go-lucky guy, and sometimes you just get a call and someone yells at you for 15 minutes, straight, saying, your endpoint didn't protect me, and I'm like, but ma'am, it's the detections right here from 3 weeks ago showing you that someone was doing something, and you just kind of have to sit there and recognize like they're having a bad day. Maybe I
Right.
don't need to make it worse. Let them vent. Do what you got to do. Um, but it's unique for
Yeah,
sure.
it is definitely for sure. I read that Sophos processes 32 billion security events per day. Like, it, how do you even begin to process that scale? And like, what role
Machine
does
learning.
like okay? So what role does AI play in that? And like, how important is it to tune that system in a way where you're not, because you obviously don't want to inundate the team with a bunch of things they don't need, but you don't want to miss
Yep.
something. Like, what's that look like?
So quick subtle drop. I have to. My manager always yells, "It's not AI." That's his bugaboo. Is we don't use AI for that piece. Um, so I had to call out for Greg on that one. But at the end of the day, I go back to the point. We have 550,000 customers. I mean, 100 million machines out there in the world have Sophos on them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're identifying hundreds of thousands of new malware variants a day. There is a very extensive reliance on that machine learning to help us sift through the data points, look for the known, pull out the unknown. There's a lot of stuff that has to be involved in that to work successfully. Um, but once again, we go back to the silver bullet. There is no 100%. There are going to be
Mm-hmm.
things that aren't recognized as malicious at that time. There are going to be emails that we scan that aren't, recognized as malicious at that time. But the more data we have, the better. I tell people for like our XDR tool, whenever our team on the MDR side leverages the XDR tool and the service deliverable, we're running scheduled queries throughout the day, 24/7, 365, generic broad stroke information on the endpoints and servers. Probably 99.9% of the data that we collect is most likely insignificant when it comes to legitimate identification of risk. But
Mm-hmm.
every single data point is valuable. And same thing for the logic, 32 billion. It's probably more than that, honestly. It's got to be. I think it was 32 billion security events on like our MDR, but I can only imagine the trillions of data points that we're collecting across all of the deployed assets. But we really have fantastic engineers that they work diligently to do what they can in order to really identify as much potential risk. We've got our labs team, they're constantly categorizing all of the samples that we collect, pulling them together into significant buckets. We've got behavioral analytics as well to kind of help recognize any anomalous activity that occurs. um, at the end of the day, we don't have billions of ML models that look for the billions of detections, but there's a lot of stuff where we can classify, sort, sift, and shape and mold the data we collect to put them in the appropriate pools that we feel, and
Mm-hmm.
then as we trickle that down, it's a lot easier to manage and sift through the data.
Right.
But the automation is something where being able to have an endpoint agent that's statistically blocking 99.9% of known threats. I think we're like 99.98 or not, 8, not whatever it is. It's a very high catch rate on the endpoint.
Right.
It makes life so much easier for a SOC team to interpret true risk when you have such a powerful endpoint agent sitting on the front lines, and all of that power comes from these engineers that are just classifying so many security events. I don't know how they do it, but it's a combination of all of these different tools and just it's interpretation. You have to know what to look for. It's the experience, it's the knowledge, it's the skills that these guys bring to the table. I wish you could see our teams chat sometimes where there are some brilliant minds that are going, "Hey, I saw this weird activity. I believe it's ransomware." We'll reach out, and you know turns out the customer was like 4 hours away from being attacked, and this was just one of our engineers seeing something that looks interesting that they've seen historically 6 months ago, and they're like, that looks odd, can someone reach out to this customer and see what's going on? We catch so many pen tests with our outreach too, because
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly looking for things, and they're like, "You saw that?" And it's like, "Well, yeah, we all of the data is anonymized, but it comes back to us, and we can sit there and go, we're seeing stuff that looks risky. It's either a pen test or you're under active attack." And they'll be like, "No, we're pen testing right now." But that's awesome that you saw it. And it's like, yeah, we've got really, really good, data ingestion capabilities. We have a lot of machine learning models that help us sift through the cracks, and it allows us to be very successful. So,
How do you think the rise of AI will change the game as we know it, not only for the attackers, but for the defenders as well?
I mean, it is a battlefield for threat actors, and giving them something like AI where they can, you know, and luckily a lot of the AI platforms nowadays block or stop the ability to leverage it in a malicious way. So, like, hey, I can't go on an AI platform and say, hey, write me a piece of malware that I can infect. So a lot of times it'll say, I can't do that because that's against the law, or that's, a violation, blah,
Right.
blah, blah.
Right.
The reality is, though, I don't necessarily see AI drastically or significantly impeding our ability to achieve the same outcomes we do today. I think
Mm-hmm.
consistently at the end of the day, cybersecurity at its core fundamentals is a human people problem. At its logic, everything you could have automation. Like there's tons of malware that just gets delivered automated, and it just goes from A to B, and it does
Mm-hmm.
the callback automatically. But all of that then becomes a foothold or a persistence mechanism for someone to then abuse. Someone
Mm-hmm.
has to take advantage of that access. Um, at the end of the day, yeah, they'll use it. We have kind of the old adage, it's the cat and mouse game. Hey,
Right.
the mouse may have got in, but the cat's going to find a new way to catch the mouse. That's traditionally what they do.
Right.
We want to maintain that same approach. AI, it's interesting. We've got AI policies in place right now. Um, but I would say from my perspective, um, it actually can help us, from a training perspective, being able to run through simulations and challenge, both our current and new hires, understanding how do they approach the methodology of what we want to achieve. Um, we're not afraid of it. We've adopted it. We use it. But I don't see it as anything that's going to give somebody a brand new means of being able to do what they can't already do today. If anything, it
Gotcha.
might make them more mobile and easier to stand up and deploy. But
Right.
once again, post exploit activity is the biggest thing that matters, and we're prepared for it. AI is not going to change anything from a post exploit behavior, and obviously it might, but it's not going to drastically or radically impede our ability to do what we do and provide the same
Right.
outcomes.
Yeah.
So
Right. Have you ever seen that video from OpenAI? It was, I think it's definitely a few years old, but it was that peekaboo game, the two AIs playing peekaboo with each other.
I haven't.
It's
You'll have
it's
to send
it
it to me.
Yeah, I'll say it's wild, but basically, like they run in these two AIs through a simulation in a map, and at first you can see like the AI does not really understand it, and then over time it gets better and better and better to the point where it's like moving objects to like
Oh,
to
now I know what
hide,
you're talking. Yeah,
and then
I've seen like a video where it's like I want to teach AI to learn how to run. So like
mm-hmm,
it just plops it on the ground and it starts to like try to figure out a way to crawl, and then it crawls to the place and it's like, well, technically you got there, but now I'm going to put rules in place where if you're not standing on your feet, you have to reset. And it's unbelievable to see it slowly learn how to
yep,
walk, take steps, and then move into a full sprint, and then turn corners and move objects.
right.
So it
See, and
really
then
like it's impressive.
yeah, and in this video, what was wild was that the AI learned how to glitch out of the map so the other AI couldn't find it. And so I'll send you this video, and it just makes me wonder if someday in the future, if someone is going to be able to write artificial general intelligence code that can just, hey, you have one job. Well, what's that job? Get a persistent foothold in something, and go. And then would that be months or years or 10 years or decades? No one really knows,
I'm
right?
I'm sure it's already happening. It's got to be happening.
Right,
But if you go with an MDR, you're statistically safer. That's the
right,
goal, because
right, right.
you gotta have the tools and the pieces in place to protect yourself from the new change. I mean, I said it before. Threat actors will never stop. They're always looking for new
Right.
ways to be more effective and efficient, and
Hmm.
you got to keep up. And
Right.
luckily for us and what we do, um, we have the ability to not kind of fear that scope or that change. There's
Right.
always going to be something new, but at the end of the day, we go back to that post exploit. That AI can only go so far before you have to, manually
Hmm.
be involved to some extent.
Right. Right.
We're ready for it. So,
Right. Awesome. I want to pivot to human behavior from a humanity standpoint. Like, what is the humanity behind these cyber criminals? Is it that these hackers are bad people and this is like a good versus evil? Or does each cyber criminal have their own reasoning behind why they're doing this? Whether it's ideology, maybe this is how they provide for their family, and maybe their perception is that we're the bad people, and they always say if there's a war, don't think it's good and bad. Everybody has their own mindset. So, what does that look like?
yeah, it's unique because we're in a position now where once again, like I said, you can call some of these companies and it's just like a help desk. It's literally a business. They probably have a building just like everybody else, and people show up to work, they sit at their desk and they process payments. um, Everyone's got a motive, and obviously some people, their motive is not necessarily to harm people but to make money. And they know large corporations, a lot of times can, you know, be negligent to that fact. And they've got insurance policies that can pay out. And to them, sometimes they're not hurting a business. They're going, hey, these insurance companies are making so much money. We're just going to take a piece of the pie and we're going to claim it for ourselves. Um, it's interesting because we brought up the point earlier of like, hey, I've got this cyber terrorist who accidentally hit a hospital and they felt bad about it and they gave the keys and said, I'm sorry, like we didn't mean to do that. At the end of the day, this is a human industry. It's a $1 trillion industry ran and led by humans, just like you and me. I mean, everyone's probably got emotion. Everyone, feels bad to a certain extent. To them, it's probably just their job. It's what they do. It's probably a challenge of, fun for them. Like I imagine, once again, not the professional stance from Sophos on like this is our firm answer, but looking at like MGM for example, I would imagine this threat actor that it was probably a game for them to see if they could compromise, this large of a business. And then once they got in, they were like, all right, well, I did it. Why don't you pay me? And that way I won't do a lot of damage to you guys. But I found the flaw. Pay me for acknowledging that. You know, it's kind of like the bounty program. Like, hey, did you find
Hmm.
an issue? Report the bounty. We'll pay you. Thank you for finding that.
Right.
And I think a lot of these guys or girls, whoever's attacking out in the world,
Right.
um, you know, we're really seeing a shift in, you know, I think what was it, like the first piece of malware ever made was a guy trying to play a joke on his buddy. So he like infected his machine so that way he could pop up a note and say like, I gotcha. That's how it started. And I don't think we ventured too far off from that. Like, hey, I gotcha. Now pay me. Like, I think that's the business. My professional stance is we don't sympathize with cyber terrorists at all. What is being done is an act of cyber terrorism on a business.
Hmm.
Um, but to answer your question, they're people. They probably deal with emotions and everything that we do on a day to day, you know, trying to put food on their table. That's the avenue that they took from a financial perspective for making money.
Right.
Um, whatever their motivation is, it led them down that path. But we've seen many instances where empathy and human emotion have come into play from a threat actor, and it's interesting to see that side where it's like, no, we actually meant to hit that business. We're sorry we got you guys. Like, here's the
Hmm.
keys, but we're still going after those guys. Like, we don't like them, but
Right.
you're
Right.
okay.
Right.
It's unique, but
Right.
it's something that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, after the conversations that I have with customers, you know, the sympathy kind of goes out the window because these guys, you know, their businesses are closing, and,
Right.
you know, there's people getting fired for this stuff, and there's a bigger impact than just taking money from someone. Like, I think
Right.
that's the part that, you know, really sucks the most is you know, obviously these threat actors know this, but there's legitimate, um, I would say, outcomes that happen from what they do beyond just financial. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people that get impacted, you know, 72 hours straight. Like, I've literally talked to people who are like, I haven't slept in like 48 hours. I've literally been up nonstop. I haven't been able to go home to my wife or my kids, or, you know, I'm here because of what they did. Um, but it's such a unique area because it's like they want to be bad, but they also want to be good to validate that they're not too bad. It's sometimes funny to me. So,
Right. Right. What tips would you have for listeners who find cyber and IT security fascinating and want to make a career out of, being a threat hunter?
um, so first thing is, if you want to get into cyber, understand that cyber doesn't sleep, and you probably won't in the future. So that's number one. Um, it's something where I never thought I would be here, but I don't see myself ever leaving. If you want tips, certifications are great. You know, obviously you could go down the rabbit hole of getting certifications. You could go to college and focus on IT and cybersecurity and this, that, and the other. Um, biggest tip for you, and it was the same for me. I didn't really have any experience. Go get some. That's the biggest thing that I can tell you is just get your foot in the door and start getting some experience. Um, you know, I wanted to be a chef when I was younger. That was my goal. I wanted to be a chef. And before I went and got my degree, um, one of my parents' friends worked at a catering company. It was like, hey, the head chef actually said, come work for us first and make sure that's what you want to do. So I went and worked at a catering company for about 4 years, and I started from 20 hours to about 78 hours a week. And I realized this is not the life for me. Um, I love to cook. I still cook today, but it's not what I wanted to do for a career. And a lot of
Hmm.
people, it's like, hey, you know, there's good money in cyber. I'm going to go get my certs and I'm going to immediately land a job. I can tell you flat out that's probably not how it's going to work.
Hmm.
It's great that you have them, but I can tell you candidly, you know, when people are looking for threat hunters or they're looking for SOC analysts, they want people who can plug and play pretty easily.
Hmm.
A lot of times, certs don't give you that plug and play. I'm not diminishing the value of certifications. They teach you what you need. Get them while you're working at some capacity in the field or the industry. Um, but make sure you love it. And it's, I got to be honest with you, I've learned so much. I never thought I'd be here. I'm here. I love it now. I love what I do. But it's something where I've seen a lot of people make a lot of financial investments in education and certifications, and they can't find a job for 24 months because everybody else who's applying has 20 plus years of experience. I think that's for a lot of jobs, but specifically in cyber, it's really, really experienced focused, because
Right.
when people are building a security team, or maybe they did like a round of layoffs and now it's time to bring in some new bodies, they're going to look for people who want that have that experience where they can come in and make an impact right away. There are plenty of companies out there that are willing to make investments in people when they see that they have potential, but go out, find an opportunity. It doesn't have to be the role you want, but find a role in cyber, get your foot in the door, start learning, understand if it's a good fit for you. And then if it is, then you bolster your knowledge with all of those certs, and you expand your portfolio and you build a really good breadth of knowledge. Um, I don't want to scare anybody away from the world. Go pursue it. It is fun. I really have had an amazing time. One of the best jobs I've had. Unbelievable support system from a management team. Probably the best managers I've ever had were from cyber. Outside of anything else, it's a business where I think um, it's so collaborative. Like, you have got to work together to be successful. If you are very siloed and you don't like communication with other people, you're probably not going to have a really good time in this industry, because
Hmm.
if you're not constantly doing knowledge share and learning and communicating with teams day in and day out, it's just, you're not going to have as much success. But
Hmm.
hopefully that answered that one.
Yes.
I am by no means a professional on that, because I kind of fell into this world. But I would say that's the biggest thing, is go out and get some real world experience and make sure it's right for you before you start making financial commitments in that space, because it might not be a good fit.
Awesome. Thank you, John. This last section here, I want to get your hot takes on. I'll ask you a few questions. You could just shout your answer back, and
Sure.
it'll let everyone know a little bit more about you. Uh, Mac OS or Windows?
Oh, Windows all the way.
All right. Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
Nice. Edge, Chrome, or Firefox?
Uh, I hate them all.
None of them are good.
if if I had to pick, I use Chrome. Um, but yeah, we'll go with Chrome. We'll just say that. It's like pick your poison is that one that I'll say.
Awesome. AWS or Azure?
I got to go with Azure, I think.
All right. All right. Intel or AMD?
Uh, I've switched. So when I used to build all my computers, I was a big Intel guy, but I've really loved the chipsets that AMD is pumping out. I gotta lean AMD on this one, I think. Slightly.
Love
They get the
love
edge.
it. They get the little bit of an edge there. I like it. Microsoft 365 or Google G Suite?
Uh, uh, my personal preference is Microsoft 365, but I think there's use cases for both in certain industries. I know education, they get heavy funding on like G Suite, and it makes sense a lot of times when you're managing 10,000 students. It's a lot easier to do.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but I'm gonna go M365. I think they've really bolstered the platform significantly, and I
Mhm.
like what they're doing and the direction they're going.
Awesome. Love to hear that. That wraps it up, John. Thank you so much for your time. This was a fascinating conversation that we had.
Yeah, for sure. I would say let's do this again in the future. It was actually a really fun chat.
Yeah.
Um, at least from a final takeaway, at least if anybody listens to this and wants to learn more, reach out to Brian. He can pull myself in. We can have a really good conversation. Um, we have grown exponentially with our MDR platform. We're sitting at over 19,500 customers. We easily have probably the largest customer base from an MDR today. People trust us for a reason. And I
Mhm.
significantly encourage you, if you don't own an MDR, to look into one. Doesn't have to be Sophos, but obviously we would love it to be Sophos. I tell people after, I do a lot of incident response stuff, and we typically, after we've triaged and neutralized the threat, I'll get on a call, or someone on my team will get on a call, and we'll talk to them. And the message I always say is, I don't care who you pick. I hope it's us. But if you're not investing in an MDR after this incident, you're not going to be prepared to handle it again when it pops up. Please learn, educate yourself on this new, service deliverable and these technologies that are available. Um, we're here to help is the biggest thing in any capacity. And just for context, one more last shameless plug. If you are ever under active attack, myself and my team are 24/7, 365. It's just Sophos Rapid Response. We don't care what tools you use. If you ever need emergency assistance, there's always somebody able to pick up the phone and help you. Um, we always want to make sure that's, for me, the most important thing. You never have to be alone in this fight. We're here to help if you need it. So
Awesome. Thank you for that, John.